Today we're going to build a medium-sized spaghetti interchange to carry traffic from the freeway to this wide avenue, which I've given the temporary name Arkland Avenue. I'll probably change that in the future. And I think that's going to take a bit of pressure off of the poor little spooey interchange that serves the center of downtown. Does a pretty good job, but I have a feeling it's going to get overwhelmed at some point. So all of that makes this intersection really important, as it not only connects Arkland Avenue to the freeway, but also Main Street. So I'm going to add as many turning lanes as I can fit in here to try to future-proof it. I have a feeling that once we start fleshing out the other areas of downtown, a lot of traffic is going to pass through this intersection because it kind of provides a shortcut through the downtown grid. At least that's the theory before the induced demand kicks in. Instead of trying to plan out the entire interchange ahead of time, I wanted to start with the most important ramps and then work backward to the smaller ones. To make the connections, I like to add these little stubs at the beginning and end of each segment, and then connect them up either just with the vanilla freeform road tool or the curve function in Network Multi-Tool. Although I usually end up fine-tuning the segments myself by hand with Move It, just to make the curve as shallow as possible. Having the short stubs at the points of contact is going to allow me to come in later and make the transition between the two types of networks a lot smoother without messing around with the main length of the curve. So it kind of allows me to work independently with each aspect of the ramp, and it's just going to allow for a nice transition. Like I mentioned a couple videos ago, I don't necessarily want to make use of every possible connection for an interchange like this, but I did want to have some additional ramps to make it a bit more practical and spaghetti-like. We have this pair of one-way roads, one going in either direction of course, which I think is the perfect spot to add a couple of on and off ramps. I think this is a really good example of why I don't want to make every possible connection. It would be really hard, for example, to connect the upper one-way road to the part of the freeway heading northeast. That being said, I did actually want to connect Arkland Avenue with the freeway in all possible ways. So first there's this ramp, and I thought I might as well add an off-ramp to the one-way system here as well because it's right there, but I just couldn't get the grades of all these ramps to be right.
What the hell?
So I got rid of a bunch of them and decided to lower this main flyover ramp to be at ground level. It's going to allow all the other ramps to pass over it at more sensible grades, and I also think it makes more sense financially from a realistic point of view to have the largest ramps be at ground level when it's possible. Not that I've ever given much thought to money in this game, but we're going to follow the principle for realism's sake. Because that big ramp is now lower down, the next ramp, which is going to carry traffic from Arkland Avenue to the freeway heading northeast, is going to have to be a big flyover ramp. And since we've already figured out the grades of all the other ramps, this one can just go right on over and it comes together really easily with really no issues at all. A lot of the details are already baked into these North American freeway assets, so most of the detailing is going to consist of filling in gaps where the built-in details don't quite fit the build. This is especially true for the pillars, especially when you have nodes where the offset has been raised really high in Node Controller, or you have ramps that are really close together or on top of railroad tracks like this one. So I just need to add in a few pillars manually, manipulating some of them in PO to be the right shape. The same is true of the road markings, and I wanted to pay particular attention to the points of contact between the interchange and the surface road network, because these can usually look pretty ugly, especially if you've manipulated them a lot with Node Controller or Move It. The main node here, I think, is going to be really where the look of the interchange lives or dies, not to be over dramatic or anything. So I want to use it to blend the look of the 8-lane road and the freeway segments, or if not blend, at least transition in a realistic way. So I'm going to make the median in the center to match that of the road. I also want the solid white lines on the outsides of the turning lanes to extend only partway out into the node. So I'm going to add these lines that don't have any rules on them, and that way I can set the to and from points of the turning lane lines to make them shorter where the ruleless line crosses over them, if that makes sense. The other side of the road is a bit harder to do this with because the slip lane here seems to not play so nicely with IMT at this sharp angle. So I have to adjust it a bunch with Move It and Node Controller until the IMT lines line up properly with the lanes. Eventually I do get that all set up properly, but I still think the different texture in between the two segments looks awful. Obviously, in real life, you do get different materials on surface roads versus elevated ramps, which can be pretty noticeable at this kind of intersection, but this ain't it. So I'm going to go in and add a simple asphalt filler in IMT on both the road segment and in the node to make the texture look more cohesive. Other than that, there are just a few things to clean up the sides, like a grass network to cover up a small area of the ruining texture, and a retaining wall on the other side to cover up the void. There are two more points of contact to detail up, and these intersections are a lot simpler than the first one. I wanted to use mostly the same techniques, like fillers and extending the lines out, and in this case adding a turning lane so that you have one last chance to peel off the road without entering the freeway system. In this case, I'm also going to add some wear decals to hopefully make everything feel a bit more cohesive, and some signs as well, just to emphasize that this is your last chance to avoid the freeway. For the other intersection, it's even easier and more straightforward, since we have two ramps merging into a two-lane road. So I'm just going to extend the white and yellow freeway lines and add some stripes to emphasize that this is still a freeway shoulder and that you probably shouldn't park here. Hopefully that's just going to make this look more like an extension of the freeway and not necessarily in line with the surface road system that makes up the rest of the one-way road. For the nodes within the interchange, the IMT decoration is a lot more straightforward because I basically just need to do it once for each type of intersection, and then I can use that as a preset to paste into similar nodes. The interesting part is going to come from the signage. Just like when we made the spooey back in like episode 3 or something like that, I wanted there to be overhead signs guiding you through the various exits and on-ramps. In fact, in some cases, I'm just going to copy these signs from the spooey and adjust them as needed. Although in this particular case, I keep fiddling around with it so much that it probably would have been faster just to make it from scratch. Then there are a couple other cases, in particular with ramps that lead to the surface streets, where I need to make some from scratch. But luckily, once I'm done with this first one, I can just take the whole thing, copy it, and paste it over on the ramp coming from the other direction leading toward the same roads, which just needs a small adjustment to a single arrow. So super easy. I like to make this kind of detailing as easy as possible myself, because I think it's just kind of boring to sit around in PO fiddling with text for hours at a time, both to do and to watch. I feel like that's an indictment of my entire channel, but anyway. And so the IMT and signage are now all taken care of, and we're going to move on to building the residential towers I was talking about, and then detailing the surrounding area. Now we're going to fit two modern apartment towers into this area, each getting about a block to itself, taking inspiration from these two in Duluth. These two builds are going to be pretty similar to the two hotels from last episode if you watched that, especially this first one, which is basically just a tower sitting in the middle of a sea of parking spots. I did want to add a little sidewalk around the perimeter so that residents can easily navigate to the entrance from any direction, and some details to spruce that up as well. I don't know, I don't really mind doing this kind of boring, repetitive detailing, but I do kind of get the urge to cut it out of the videos because it feels like it sort of bogs them down a little bit, but please let me know what you think of that. I think the most interesting part about this apartment, other than the asset itself, of course, is the garbage area out back, which is maybe not a great sign. But in contrast to that, the second apartment is going to be a bit more interesting because we have to fit it into a more confined space in between the railway and the road. I like how this asset has a skinny tower attached to kind of a fat lobby, but it did make it a little bit more challenging to fit a parking lot around the base while still having a road on the other side. And yeah, that road is going to serve a purpose, as you'll see in a couple minutes. So I used the big parking lot roads set to make a lot that snakes around the footprint of the building. It's kind of annoying to do, and I do cheat a little bit by using the center segments on the edges, or at least the edges up against the buildings, so that I can fit some parking up against the base of the buildings, which I think looks a little bit more realistic, especially when you add in handicapped parking there. Honestly, it's easier to work with the center segments on an edge like this rather than the purpose-made edge segments that allow for parking spots on the edge, just because the nodes seem to be a lot smaller. But the downside is that you do have to do a bunch of detail work to cover up the void that results at the edges. But anyway, I'm sure you're familiar with what it looks like to create a sidewalk around the base of a building by this point. There are a few bits here and there that do need some extra retaining walls due to the extreme slope in this area. And one of those is the part of the build that makes this apartment more interesting, which is how this road passes underneath the driveway between the front and the rear parts of the parking lot. Theoretically, there was room here to just have the road snuggle up against the tracks next to a retaining wall, but I thought that it would be more interesting to pretend that the bit of land in between is part of the rail's right-of-way, so they weren't able to build a road there and ended up having to create this ridiculous, over-engineered platform so that people could drive from one part of the parking lot to the other. It's probably a little silly, but I kind of like it anyway. All of this development at the edge of downtown results in the sort of no man's land between the urbanization and the railway that is always a pain to detail and that I never, ever overthink. I'm thinking that before all of the redevelopment that's happened on this side of town, there would have been buildings going pretty much all the way up to the tracks. But ever since tearing those down, they've just allowed this particular area, at least, to return to nature, other than this retaining wall, which they needed to add in later for the new road, which again, we'll get to why that's here in a second. So anyway, it's gotten quite lush down here since we're at the bottom of the hill, and a few trees have managed to take root and grow up in the last 60 to 70 years. In Duluth, they have what looks to be a path that runs down the hill and passes under the freeway, which presumably is part of the trail system as a whole and isn't just for infrastructure nerds to look at the underside of the overpass. So I wanted to do something similar here. There's also a parking lot here in Duluth, but I think it's for something else and isn't meant to be a trailhead attached to the path or anything like that. In our version, I'm going to turn it into a trailhead so that you could park here and take the trail out of town. which might not be something that is to everyone's taste, but I think it sounds kind of fun, a bit more adventurous to start your hike in the city and then head out into nature rather than having to travel out into the middle of nowhere just to get started. At this point in the series, I don't know exactly where the trail is going to go, so I'm just going to create a short length of it for now, and that'll give us the freedom to come back later on in a future episode and direct it wherever we want it to go, whether we connect it up to the Lake Walk Trail or some path going up into the hills or whatever. Probably both of those at least, and maybe something else as well. As I was working on all that, I noticed that the landscape inside the interchange looked a little bit bare, so I did want to add some very slightly overgrown grass and a couple of lines of trees, putting them mostly between surface roads or the trail and the freeway for a little bit of noise abatement. It's probably not going to be too effective, but it does look nicer this way, I think. So that's it for the Spaghetti interchange and surroundings. I had originally wanted to make the interchange actually a little bit smaller than the one in Duluth, but obviously that is not how it turned out. I do like how it looks though, as far as interchanges go, and I hope you like it as well. And I hope you like the video. Oh, also I deforested this area and put some houses and apartments down in line with the style of development from last episode. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.